Thank you for listening to this weekly podcast from the City Church, a ministry in Springfield, Massachusetts, which is seeking to reveal Christ, reconcile people, and renew our city. For more information about the City Church, or additional media and other resources, or to make a tax-deductible donation that will further spread the gospel in Springfield and beyond, please visit thecitywithin.org. We now take you to part 6 of our sermon series entitled, The Gospel According to Moses. In this message, Pastor Anthony Wirth will be discussing Exodus 19 verses 1 through 8 and the law.
Well, welcome to the City Church. I'm doing great. Just got back from 2 weeks of vacation in California. In case you didn't know, I was born and raised there, so I was visiting family members and friends, and it was fantastic. It was really, really great. And the reason I tell you that isn't to brag that I was in California for 2 weeks, but really because I want to say something about what has been happening in our church that is just phenomenal, and that is that I can leave for 2 weeks and know that I can entrust the ministry of the word to very faithful men to preach the scriptures and the truth of the gospel clearly and in a way that helps feeds our souls. And so we are a very blessed church to be only 4 years old and be at that sort of a place. And so if you see John, Josh, Pat around, shake their hands, say thank you. Thank you for being a part of this body and for being willing to serve in such a way. So I haven't preached in 5 weeks. 5 weeks, that's a long time. So this could be terrible. This could be amazing, or we could be here till like 3 p.m., right? And so we're going to be in Exodus chapter 19 this morning as I'm carrying on in this sermon series that we started a number of weeks ago. By sermon series here at our church, what we mean is we take a theme or a topic or one of the books of the Bible and we look at it for several weeks in a row. And so what we've been doing is we've been examining the life of Moses, this amazing character in the Old Testament, and seeing how God has been using Moses and really people throughout history to point to the real central character of his story, which is Jesus Christ. So God's been telling this massive story, but he uses people in that story to reveal the greater story and even the prime character who is Jesus Christ. And so today we're going to look at this very important piece of the scriptures, and that is the law, and the law given through Moses to the nation Israel, and what that really means for them back then, and what the application is for us today. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to read verses 1 through 8 of chapter 19, and then we'll pray, and we'll get into the message. If you have a Bible, you can follow along. If you don't, there's some scattered on, but I would really encourage you to grab one and follow along. And if you don't own one, keep it. It's our gift to you, but it'll be on the screen above me as well. So Exodus 19, 1 through 8. On the third new moon, after the people of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on that day they came into the wilderness of Sinai. They set out from Rephidim and came into the wilderness of Sinai and then camped in the wilderness. There Israel encamped before the mountain while Moses went up to God. The Lord called to him out of the mountain, saying, "Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the people of Israel, you yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the people of Israel." So Moses came, and he called the elders of the people. He set before them all these words that the Lord had commanded him. All the people answered together and said, "All that the Lord has spoken, we will do." And Moses reported the words of the people to the Lord. This is God's word. Let's pray together. Father, we believe that you are a powerful God. You are the all-powerful God. That just by your words you can bring things into existence that we couldn't even imagine. We believe that you are the one orchestrating and controlling all things according to your will and your purpose for your glory. We believe that you're good. We believe that you're involved in human history and you're involved in our personal history, and we believe that you are present. Through Christ, we are told that it is better for him to rise and go to you so that he might send his Spirit. And your Spirit, we believe, indwells your believers and is here today. And we believe that your Spirit has power to use this word that he wrote and to stir our hearts and our affections, to open our eyes and our ears, to let us see Jesus as the most beautiful object of our affections and to be our all in all. And that's what we're asking for. God, many of us have come in to this room this day with all sorts of distractions, all sorts of things leading and guiding our lives outside of Christ. And I'm pleading with you, for me personally and for all of us, to be centered again. And for those who don't even know you, God, that you would grab hold of them in a way that only you can. And they would see you the way that I see you and that so many in here do. And so use this word by the power of your Spirit. We ask these things in the matchless and precious name of Jesus Christ, and all God's people said. Amen. So I don't do this very often, but by show of hands, how many of you met this little guy before? So this is my youngest child, my son, Malachi. He's like the cutest kid on the planet, right? Don't tell my other 3 kids, right? But what I love about him is his hair. Doesn't he have the coolest hair? Like, he has the coolest hair, right? But with this cool hair comes a problem, right? So let me tell you a story. Probably about 3 or 4 times a month, I will come home from wherever it is that I've been. Whether I'm entering through the front door or the back door, I hear a scream from Malachi. And the scream is something like, "Mommy, stop, it hurts. Mommy, stop, it hurts." And I'm thinking, what is going on? So I run through the first floor, and if he's not there, then I run to the second, and I see my wife, Nichelle, with my son, Malachi, and she's just brushing his hair. And he's screaming, "Mommy, it hurts," right? Now, if it were your first time over to my house, or even if you just heard this walking by, what might you think if you heard a child screaming, "Mommy, stop, it hurts"? I don't know what you might think, but if it wasn't this, that she was just brushing his hair, you'd be wrong, because you don't know the whole story. You don't know the context in which this screaming finds its place. And I want to submit to you that that's often our big problem with the law of God. The 10 Commandments and even the rest of the law, all 613 combined, is we don't know the place in which it actually fits into the story. And so we misunderstand it, we think wrong things about it. And so, for instance, if you were to just walk out on the street today, or even if you were to talk to a friend or a family member, even if you're a Christian, you might have a misunderstanding about the law. Most people might say, well, the law is really just how you get to heaven, right? So you follow these rules and that's what gets you into heaven. Other people might say that it's just a good basis for morality, regardless of which culture or time or place, just a good basis. But I think more common than that in our day and age, most people might say, well, it's the thing that actually contradicts Jesus' teachings because it seems so different than what it was that he was teaching. But this is all because we don't understand where it falls in the grand story. Let me illustrate it this way real quick before we get into the rest of the message. How many of you are familiar with this scene? Yeah? Okay, so this movie was made in the early 80s. Don't you feel old now, right? And that's crazy. Karate Kid, the early 80s, right? And so what's this guy's name? Mr. Miyagi, right? And who's this guy? Yeah, to Mr. Miyagi, it's Daniel's son. To Daniel's mom, it's Daniel, right? And so Mr. Miyagi here is teaching Daniel how to wax a car, correct? Is Daniel learning how to wax a car? Is Mr. Miyagi teaching him how to wax a car? No. He's learning how to wax a car, but that's not Mr. Miyagi's point, right? His point is to actually teach him karate. Now, in this scene, and as the movie goes on, you're probably familiar with this, Daniel is extremely irritated with Mr. Miyagi because he wants to learn karate, and he thinks all he's learning is how to wax a car. You follow me? And this is the same thing that we often fall into regarding the law. We look at it and we go, what, why? And we get annoyed, but it's because we don't understand the whole story. And so what I want to do today is I want to think about the law and where it finds its place in the story. And until we find its place in the story and understand its context, we can't actually apply it or even think about it in regards to our own lives. And so let's start with that. And to do this, to think about the law, we need to first understand what it is. What is it generally speaking? And what it is a covenant. The law is a covenant. I don't know how many of you have ever heard that before, but that's actually what it is. The law of God is a covenant. Now, this is a word that we don't use very often in modern American English. Christians probably use it more so than anybody else. And if we do at large in our culture, it's probably only really in the context of marriage. That's kind of our only understanding of the word covenant. So let's think about the word covenant for just a minute. Let's think first of all about what it's not. Let's clear up some misunderstandings, some misconceptions. I'll be really quick here, but only to compare it with what it actually is. And so what a covenant is not is it's not merely a contract. And I think that's our biggest misunderstanding with covenant. When you hear covenant, you probably think contract. And a contract, I mean, we're all pretty familiar with contracts, so I won't belabor the point. But if you have a cell phone, you're in a contract, right? And a contract is based on performance. So you do A, B, and C, and you get to keep what it is that I've given you, or you get to gain something else, right? So it's entirely based on performance. Or another way of stating it, and this is really important, is that contracts are actually based on mutual distrust. Mutual distrust, right? Which is to say that I'm going to write a contract with you in order to cover my bases because I don't fully trust you. Right? So your cell phone company doesn't fully trust you. Your car, right? The people who are loaning, they don't fully trust you. So it's based on mutual distrust, right? So that's the basic misunderstanding of covenant. It's not merely a contract. So let's think about what a covenant actually is, right? What is a covenant? And to do this, I want to kind of give you just a brief example. So the most common understanding that we have of covenant in our day and age and in our culture is that of marriage, right? And so a marriage, right, when two people get together at the wedding ceremony, they proclaim these vows, right? And these vows, if you're familiar with them, especially the traditional ones, go something along the lines of, I promise to honor and to cherish you in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health, in rich or poor, and then until death do us part. So what's the difference between this and a contract? And the difference is that it's future looking, based on promise, not performance, right? And it's based on mutual trust, not distrust. And so the opposite of these vows being made at a wedding ceremony would be the maybe prenuptial agreement that happened before it, right? And so a prenuptial agreement is a contract based on mutual distrust. Like, just in case I get into this marriage and it falls apart, I've covered my bases because you didn't do A, B, and C. So it's based on performance and distrust, whereas the vows are based on promise and trust. You follow me so far? And so let's think about covenants in regards to the way that God gives them. And what's his purpose in these covenants that are based on trust, that he is saying you can trust me, and based on promise, his own faithfulness. What is this all about? And so to do this, I want to start broadly thinking more like description of covenant and then nailing it down to definitions. So let's think first like description, right? Let's just describe covenant. And to do this, I want to kind of say, well, when God makes a covenant with a person or even with people, he's calling us into a particular kind of relationship, a different kind of relationship than most of us are used to thinking about in regards to us and God. So here's some common understandings of our relationship to God, right? I'm probably familiar with all of these, right? So we often think of our relationship to God as his creation. So he's our creator, he's the one who's made us, and so that's one aspect of our relationship. Maybe his children, so he's our father, he's our provider and protector, right? And so we're his children. Again, that relationship, pretty common understanding. His redeemed, so through Christ, he saves us from Satan's sin and death, and so we're familiar with that kind of relationship. And then his friends, he's our advocate, he's our comforter, and we're probably familiar with that kind of relationship. I want to submit to you that when God makes a covenant with a person or with people, what he's actually doing is he's calling us into a different kind of relationship, one that most of us probably haven't put too much thought into, maybe have never even heard of before, and it's this. He's calling us to be his partners. He's calling us to be his partners. So when God makes a covenant, when he makes a promise, he's actually saying to a person or to a people, I want you to partner with me in something. And what is that something? Well, that something is his grand story. And so God has said from the beginning, I'm writing this story. And at the end, I'm going to make all things new because sin came into the world. In the middle of that story is Christ, right? And so he's telling this story. And when he makes a covenant, what he's doing is he's saying to that person or to that people, I want you to partner with me in my purpose of this grand story that I'm writing. I want you to play a role in this story with me. He's inviting us in to partner with him. You follow me so far? So if you look back at all the covenants given in the Old Testament, You can notice this is exactly what God was doing, right? So he creates everything, right? With Adam, he puts him in the garden. And then he tells Adam to be fruitful and multiply, to exercise dominion over everything. And in essence is saying, partner with me in creation, right? Help make it flourish. And then of course it fails, right? And everybody is sinning all the time, the scriptures say. And so God floods the earth. And then he makes a covenant with Noah. And he basically calls Noah into being sort of like the second Adam in a sense, right? To do sort of the same thing and to help make humanity flourish and creation flourish. After him comes Abraham, and he says, through you, Abraham, I'm going to build a family that's going to bless the entire world. I'm asking you to partner with me in this part of the story. And then we have the Mosaic covenant here, the law, which we'll get to in a second. And then with David, he makes a covenant with David, and he says there's going to be a day where I'm going to make a kingdom, right? And it's going to come, and it's going to be reigned by this king who will sit on the throne forever, who's Jesus Christ, right? And so he's saying, I want you to partner with me in this aspect of my story. And so what is the Mosaic covenant? What is the law all about? And how do we partner with God? How's he calling us to partner in this? And so to think about this, we got to think about the uniqueness of the Mosaic covenant. So again, big story. The law finds its place in it. What's unique about it? And how is God then calling us to partner with him? And so regarding the uniqueness, and this is critical, because we can't actually apply the law to our own lives and understand how it fits into our story even until we understand the uniqueness of it in God's story. And so the two things that I want to point out that are unique about the law of God are, first of all, when it was given, and then secondly, to whom it was given. So when it was given and to whom it was given. And these are critical. Otherwise, we can just make the law say all sorts of different things and apply it in all sorts of weird ways, which people do all the time. And so let's think, first of all, about when it was given. When it was given. And this is so important. And so look with me back in chapter 19. Here's what it says. He says, you yourselves, this is God speaking to Moses, you yourselves have seen what I did, past tense, to the Egyptians. And what did he do to the Egyptians? Well, we just heard about it for 2 weeks, right? When John was preaching, he was talking about the Exodus and the wandering in the wilderness and those sorts of things. He destroyed the Egyptians. And then he goes on and he speaks about what he's done for them. And he says, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Past tense. Past tense. And so think about this picture that God is painting for Moses and the people for just a second. I bore you on eagle's wings. I destroyed the Egyptians and I bore you on eagle's wings and I brought you to myself. Now this idea of bearing on eagle's wings is this snatching up and this carrying. In other words, God is basically saying, remember how I did everything to free you from Egypt? You didn't fight your way out. You didn't argue your way out. You didn't do anything. I picked you up and I carried you out of Egyptian slavery. I did that. I delivered you. Then he also says, and I brought you to myself. So I didn't just deliver you to be orphans, but I brought you to myself. I gave you a new identity as you're a part of my family now. And so here's why this is so important. If this is past tense, right? If this is past tense, what God did, he destroyed the Egyptians, he delivered them, he gave them new identity. This is in chapter 19, right? How many of you are familiar with where the law begins? Anybody? You could shout it. Where are the Ten Commandments? Come on, nobody? Really? It's the next chapter. It's Exodus 20, right? Okay, so that's your homework for the next week, right? Figure out where it is and then memorize all of them, okay? So Exodus 20. So I just read from Exodus 19. So this is happening before God gives the law, before he gives the law. And so he's reminding them of what he has done before he gives them a law. So what this means, if I'm reminding you that I delivered you, that I gave you new identity, and then I'm giving you the law, what this means then is that following the law cannot be the thing that delivers you. And following the law cannot be the thing that gives you identity. Those have already been given. Deliverance has already been given. Identity has already been given. So the law can't mean that. Okay, so the second unique thing, and we'll talk about why that matters so much in a few minutes. The second unique thing, right, is to whom it was given. To whom it was given. Now, was the law given to Moses? Kind of a trick question. Yes, but also no, because it was given through Moses to the entire nation. And this is unique. This isn't a covenant with just one man like to Abraham. This is to the entire nation, right? So read with me. Here's what it says. Thus you shall say, God to Moses, to the house of Jacob, and tell the people of Israel. It's a community. God's not just about giving this covenant to Moses in this instance, but the entire community. It's not just about one person, it's about everybody. And so the law is given to a community, and it's given after the deliverance and after identity. So those are the major things that make it unique. And until we know those things, right, in the grand story of God, we can make the law say all sorts of things and apply it in all sorts of weird ways in our life. But that being said, if it was given in the past, right, if God did something and he's given it to a community, what does that mean for us? And I want to say that really there are four things that make the Mosaic covenant matter to us. Four things that make it matter to us. The first three are all explicit, which is to say that you can read through the passage that I read and you can see them right there. He says, this is why I'm giving you the law. This is why I'm making the covenant with you. But the fourth one is implicit, which is to say you gotta read kind of between the lines and understand the grand story of God for it to make sense. So let's hit the first three. Why does the Mosaic covenant matter? The first one is this: to make us his treasure. To make us his treasure. See, look at what he says. Now, therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples, for all the earth is mine. If you keep my covenant, if you keep the law, you will be my treasured possession. Now, if you've been following with me so far, you're gonna ask the question, but he delivered them and gave them identity. Didn't he already love them? Yes, he did already love them. So then what does this mean? That they will become his treasured possession if they obey the covenant. And I'd say there's a difference between this kind of love of deliverance and identity and this idea of treasured possession, right? And so think historically with me for a second. Back in this time, and even in modern times in a variety of different nations, there are kings, right? And in some of these nations, especially in the past historically, ancient times, when somebody took over the kingship, they owned everything. Everything was theirs. Even the people, to a certain degree, were theirs, and the people's stuff, to a certain degree, were theirs. So they had everything. But I'm sure there were some things in the king's life that they saw to be treasure. They saw it to be personal. They saw it to even have a sort of sentimental value, a value beyond everything else. And this is what's happening here. Do you notice this? He says, for all the earth is mine. I own everything, God says. I own the trees, I own the birds, I own the land, I own the sea, and I own every single created being and thing. It's mine. Even people, whether they acknowledge it or not, are God's. But he wants to make us into a treasured possession. A treasured possession. Which is to say that he can save you and give you identity and you not be a treasured possession. That sounds really strange, so think about this with me for a second. I'll tie in sort of the metaphor that we've been using with marriage right now, okay? So me and my wife started dating. I thought she was sitting right here. I was going to look at her, but she's not there. She's in the kids' ministry. We started dating the day I graduated high school, June 22nd, 2001. And I started falling in love with her immediately. We got married on February 26th of 2005. That was 10 years ago, so we just celebrated our 10-year anniversary a few months ago. I loved Nichelle the day that we got married. I loved her. When I made those vows to her that I will honor you and cherish you in good times and in bad, in sickness and health, rich or poor, I made those vows because I loved her. But I can stand before you right now without any fear of lying to any degree at all and say to you that she is far more of a treasured possession to me now than she was then. That doesn't mean that she's more valuable in that kind of weird objective sense, but she's more to me because of the oneness that has evolved from then till now. You see, back then I was in love and she was in love and we proclaimed that love to each other, but over the next 10 years, we had this time with each other where this oneness was developed, where she became a more treasured possession to me. And you would ask, well, how did that happen, right? How does that happen? And what it is really is us opening ourselves up to each other and saying to one another, here's what I like, and here's what I don't like. And even as we change throughout the years, and as God adds kids to our family, then that creates all different dynamics. And it's us constantly in communication with each other saying, here's what I like, here's what I don't, here's what I hate, here's what I love. And then me acknowledging that with her and what she likes and dislikes, and saying, well, I'm gonna subject myself to your likes and dislikes. I'm gonna mold to you. And as I do that, and she does that with me, then this oneness is created, right? And this oneness develops over time that becomes more solid to the point where she becomes more of a treasured possession to me. And so, I love all of you wives in the room, but not at all like the way I love my wife, right? And I love all of your kids, but not at all the way that I love my own children. And this is what's happening here. God is saying, I love you, but I want more than that. I want this oneness where you are my treasured possession. And he says, this is how you do it. You acknowledge what I love and what I hate and what I like and what I dislike, and you subject yourself to me, and we mold together and we create this oneness. And over that time, you become treasured possession, but it only happens through obedience. Now, when you're in love, you don't call it obedience, you just call it love. And so then I would ask the question, when you read through the things that Jesus commands, and you read through the things that God commands through the apostles, and even as he commands through the Old Testament, you come across things that rub you the wrong way, and you think about your own life and where you are relationally or sexually or financially or all these different things, and God says, but I don't want you to live that way. I want you to live this way. Do you immediately say, no, I'm doing whatever I want? Or do you look at what you're doing and you justify it? And I would say, give it up. You could be his treasured possession. You could be God's treasured possession. Is that not more worthwhile than whatever it is that you're clinging to, that God says, just let it go? And so he wants us to be his treasured possession. This is what he wants from the law. So that's the first explicit thing. The second explicit thing, again, directly in the text, is this: to make us a holy nation. Holy nation. So I'm merging the verses together. I'll read it for you. Next slide, please. It says, now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, as we've talked about, right, you shall be to me a holy nation. This is what he wants out of the covenant and us keeping it, to make us into a holy nation, to which every one of us goes, yippee! Because we have no idea what is going on here, right? What do you mean you want to make us into a holy nation? That doesn't get me all excited. But this is what he wants, right? And so let's think about this for a second. What does this mean to be a holy nation? How's God going to make us into this? And why does that even matter? Why should that excite us at all? And so think about this for a second. And to do this, we got to step back, both historically and geographically, and understand these things, right? So think back with me, ancient times. Most historians and archaeologists would say that it's during this time, actually, that Moses is being given the law, that cities began to form. That is to say, dense populations in small proximity, right, began to form. Cities began to form. And these cities, as most archaeologists and historians would say, tend to form around mountains. They would find a mountain, and the primary reason was because they wanted to build a temple at the top. And in fact, if there was a city that departed from a different city and formed a new city, and they couldn't find a mountain, they would build one for themselves. They were called ziggurats. You guys remember that from like 6th grade history, right? Ziggurats. They would build basically a mountain. And what they would do is they would put a temple at the top of that. And the reason for the temples and the mountains, right, were because the people who were outside of Israel, different, people who were pagans, worshiped different gods. They had decided and believed that if they traveled up the mountain to get as close to wherever God or gods were that they believed in, and then made sacrifices, then that God or gods, they would be pleased with them, and they would change their circumstances or situations, right? So these cities, they revolved around mountains and this temple and this idea of going up and pleasing God or gods, right? Now, think about the difference here. If you're a people outside of Israel, you're trying to form a city, you're going to look for a mountain, you're going to build a temple to try to reach God. But what is happening here is the exact opposite. God brought them to the mountain, and God came down to the mountain, and God spoke through the mountain. This is a completely different kind of forming of city. This is God forming the city, not man forming the city. And if that's the case, then God is forming an altogether different kind of city, a city that's not formed around man and his ideas, but it's formed around God and his ideas. And so what God is doing is he's saying, you're not like all other cities. You're my city. You're my people. And if that's the case, you would think then that the law would be a major point of distinguishing this city from all other cities. And it is. That's the point of the covenant, to make a holy nation, a distinguished people, a set apart people, a different kind of city. And so, for example, I would say that the primary things that we as human beings take that are not necessarily bad things, even I would say morally neutral things, even good things, that we take and we use to destroy relationships and even societies, things that we have used wrongly and brought brokenness into our world, the primary things that we use in the wrong way that do this to societies are sex, money, and power. We take sex, we use it wrongly, we destroy relationships in society, money and power, same thing, right? So if that's the case, and most cities, of course, eventually break because they use these things the wrong way, you would think that God would say to his city, I don't want you to deal with these things like they do. I want you to deal with these things in this way because this is a different city. It's a distinguished city. And of course, he addresses these things all throughout the law. He addresses sexuality and sex life, and God says it is sacred. And so here's how I want you to deal with sexuality and relationships and marriage. And so, for instance, right, you get into the next chapter, 10 Commandments, you find, thou shalt not commit adultery. Now, as far as we know, as history is recorded, this is the first time that adultery was illegal for men as well as women. Most societies would say it was totally fine for a man to commit adultery. But here in this law, God says men and women are equal in dignity, value, and worth. He sets them apart as a completely different kind of city in which most other cities around would look at that and say, why would you do that? And that's the point. He's creating a holy nation. And then you get to money, and you would think that God would address money in this city and in this environment to separate them. And of course he does. You read through it, and if you read through the entire thing, you're going to find that I think it's after like 7 years, the person, an average Israelite is giving away like 23.5% of their income. That's insane. The average American gives away less than 2%, right? So if we're all giving away 23.5%, the rest of the world looks at it and says, what are you doing, right? And that's exactly the point. They were radically different. God wanted them to help one another for the sake of the community's flourishing, right? Again, given to the entire community. And then power as well. You would think he would address this, and he does. He says to them, treat the alien and the sojourner and the foreigner among you like your own, because you are aliens and sojourners and foreigners. Don't use the blessings that I've given you to oppress other people the way other cities do. You're a different kind of city. Now, you might say, well, here in America, we're like that. I mean, the average citizen, understands these sorts of things. And just by sort of a side note, I would suggest to you that the only reason most people view sex this way, or view money this way, or view power this way, the only reason we have charities, the only reason we have hospitals, the only reason that there is even such a thing as adultery, and it's even condemned, even in our crazy society as it is. I don't know how long this is going to last, but the only way we have this in America is because we're actually riding on the coattails of this holy nation. If this holy nation never existed, America would look just like every other ancient city. But God set this people aside. He set them apart, and the rest of the world looked at it, and they were so shocked by it that they began to even adopt some of their principles because they seemed helpful. And so God sets them apart, right? And so that's the second explicit, right? So to become his treasure, and then to be a holy nation, right? The third one, again, explicit, found directly in the text, is to make us a kingdom of priests. To make us a kingdom of priests. And so I'll read it again. And again, compiling these verses. Now, therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be to me a kingdom of priests. A kingdom of priests. What on earth does that mean, right? Well, notice first of all that this is plural. It's plural, priests. Again, communally speaking, if you follow the law together, you will be a kingdom of priests. So what was the main point of a priest? What was their objective? And I would say primarily to be a mediator between God and man. And so when people wanted to worship, The priests led them in that. They brought them to God. And when God gave his scriptures and he wanted them to be taught so that people would learn, he would do that through the priests. And so they were mediators between God and man. They were bridging the gap, right? And here what he's saying is, I want you all to be a kingdom of mediators. I want you all as a community to show the rest of the world, to bring me to the rest of the world and bring the rest of the world to me as a community. And so Jesus, right, in the Sermon on the Mount, he says this phrase that I'll bet all of us are familiar with, even if we've never read the Bible, even a few words out of it. He says, let your good works so shine before men that they may see them and give glory to your Father who is in heaven, right? Now, most of us hear that, especially in our individualistic American culture. We hear that and we go, okay, so for me, if I feed the hungry and I clothe the naked and I visit the widow and the orphan and the prisoner, then people around me, my coworkers and neighbors and family members, they'll see those good works that I am doing and they'll give glory to our Father who is in heaven. And that is true. They probably will see that and they probably will acknowledge that something's happening in your life and it's probably God. But what Jesus is actually saying isn't you, and you, and you, and you, and you, and you, all individually do good works. He's saying you, collective. And in English, we don't really have a word for this unless you're in the South. It's y'all, right? And that's the last time I'll ever use that word in my life. But he's saying you, at large, all of you, do good works, and they will see and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. This is why when Jesus prayed and he's in the garden, sweating blood over the agony that he knows he's about to face on the cross, he's praying for his people. And he says to the Father, Father, just as you and I are one, so might they be one. So might they have this unity so the rest of the world will know. They will know that you are real and that you are true. And so Jesus says to his disciples, the world will know that you are one, that you are mine by your love for yourself. That's not what you guys, wake up. That's not what he said. Somebody correct me here, right? He said for your love one for another, which is to say, as a community, you get together and you love each other. You sacrifice, you give, you serve, even if it hurts, because that's how the world will know that you are mine, and that's how they'll know that I am real and I am true. Not because you do good works on your own, but because as a community you do. Which means we have to ask the question, does this line up with my life? Am I so involved in the community of God that I sacrifice and I give and I serve in such a way that God has put on display? Or do I sneak in late to church and sneak out early and claim to go to a gospel community and claim to do service works and claim to give and claim to serve, but in reality you're not really doing any of it? And the reality of that is, how is the world going to know? How they're going to know? Now I say that not to try to get your money or to get you to serve. I say that because God wants a light in this city. That's why he said you are a city on a hill, an altogether different kind of city. And this city operates in a different way for the sake of the rest of this city to see God for all of who he is. That's what he wants from us, right? And so these are the three explicit, right? To become his treasure, to be a holy nation, to be a kingdom of priests. But the fourth one, and I think extremely important, is the implicit one, which is to say it's not directly in the text. You have to understand the grand story of God and what he's doing, and then read this over again, and then you'll see it, right? And so I want to take you to the reaction of the people, right? The reaction of the leaders of the people in particular. So God gives to Moses this I'm going to give you a covenant. Here's what I want you to do. I'm basing it on the fact that I've delivered you. I've given you identity. And it's so that you can be my treasure, kingdom of priests, holy nation. And then he says this to them. It's just awesome. So Moses came. He calls the elders of the people. He set before them all the words that the Lord had commanded him. Now check out their response. All the people answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. And Moses reported the words of the people to the Lord. Doesn't that seem strange at all to you? God says, you keep my covenant, my law. It goes on for chapters if you want to read it. You keep it all, and you'll be to me a treasured possession, a holy nation, a kingdom of priests, and they say, everything we will do. Doesn't that seem slightly insane? To me it does. I mean, what would cause somebody to react this way? You're giving me this huge list of laws, and my response is, everything, I'll do it. I got it, I will do this. What would cause me to respond that way? And the only thing that I can think of that would cause me to respond that way is after God says, if you do, you can be my treasured possession. You can be my holy nation. You can be my kingdom of priests. And when he says that, you say, well, then whatever you want from me, I want to be that, so I will do it. Even though you're so naive. I think about my wedding day. Michelle, in richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, in good times and in bad, I will honor and cherish you. That's the craziest thing I've ever said in my life. It's so hard. Why would I say that? What would cause me to say that to her? Because I loved her. I loved her. And even if I knew that I was going to break these vows later in the future, everything inside of me said, but I want to keep them because I love you. And that's what's happening here. The people are so stirred that when God says, you could be my treasured possession, and then lays out this crazy law, they say, yes, I want to be your treasured possession, God. Whatever you ask me, I want to be that. This is what's going on. They're stirred. Their desires are stirred to follow after God. This is why David could sing throughout in the Psalms, God, I love your law. Why? Because it's in following and being molded by God that he becomes a treasured possession. But what's so interesting is it's not too long until they break this word. In fact, it appears to be only a few days. Moses leaves, he goes up the mountain. He's gone for apparently too long. They take their gold and their silver and they take it to Aaron and they say, melt this down and make for us a different God. And so they construct this golden calf, a symbol of a God that they would have known in Egypt, and they begin to worship it. God, whatever you say, we will do. And they immediately break the first and second commandment like that. Why would God give commands knowing that they would not be able to keep them? And not only that, why would God hear them say, Lord, whatever you ask, we will do, and he knows that they're liars, and not say anything? Why not respond and say, you're not going to do everything that I say. Don't kid yourself. Why not respond that way? Why give laws that he knows that they can't keep? And I would say because he's not just trying to stir their desire in the law. He's trying to stir their desperation. He knows full well that they won't be able to keep the law. And he knows full well that they are liars. Because the end of the law wasn't for their glorification. In other words, it's not as if they kept the law and were totally obedient and then God said, okay, end of story, we're done. My story is finished because you kept the law. That wasn't the point of the law. The point of the law was actually to point to the one who is the end of the story. The ultimate covenant keeper, the ultimate promise keeper, the one who would fulfill the entire law, who is Jesus. It was meant to point to a different covenant that Christ would make on his own, because the story wasn't about them, but about him. And so they break this law, and they break this law, and they break this law, and centuries go by of them continuing to break the law. And God sends to them this man named Jeremiah, and he says this, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Now check this out. Not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, that covenant being this covenant that we've been talking about. My covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, declares the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. And here's the new covenant. I will put my law within them, not on tablets of stone, within them. I will write it on their hearts, not on scrolls, but on their hearts. I will be their God, and they shall be my people. We will have a oneness that was never experienced before. And no longer shall each one teach his neighbor and each his brother, saying, know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. Now check this out. How is this going to happen? For I will forgive their iniquity. I will remember their sin no more. I will forgive their iniquity. I will remember their sin no more. Time goes by. This man named Jesus steps into human history, proclaims that if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. I'm God in the flesh. And he begins to teach all of his people, and he says to them, I have not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. It was good, but I've come to fulfill it, the thing that you could not do. I've come to take on flesh, to live perfectly according to the law, which you could not do. And in that sense, now I can die and take on the justice that you deserve, the death that you deserve for your sin and breaking this covenant and this law. I can take it on me and I can forgive you. And when I forgive you now, this thing on your heart is not just words on a page like laws, but it's me. It's personal, it's me. And then Jesus gathers his disciples just before he's arrested and crucified. And he has this meal with them, and he takes the bread. And he says to them, a new covenant I make with you. This bread broken, my body, this cup, my blood shed for you. This is the new covenant in my blood, in me. Not on tablets of stone, not on scrolls. And he says in essence, I will forgive your sin, and you will be stirred in a radically different way. And so I would ask you today, do you want to be his treasured possession? There's nothing more I want than to be God's treasured possession. And I hope it's the same for you. And if that's the case, then let Jesus be your center. So if you came in here all distraught because you've broken all of these laws that God has given, and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't think he's going to love me anymore, you're thinking too much about you. The law wasn't meant for you. It was meant for Jesus. And if you came in here thinking you're something amazing because you keep the law better than other people, listen, you're staring at yourself, and it's not about you. It's about Jesus. So stare at Jesus and let him stir you, because he will. Amen? Let's pray. Our Father, our good, gracious God, you sent your Son into this world to live the life that we couldn't, to die for our sin, to rise from the dead, to send your Spirit. We believe that your Spirit is alive and well in your people. Stir us, God, by your Spirit, to want to obey for the sake of being your treasured possession. We want that. And so, God, please help us. Help us today when we want to fight with our wife or husband or our kids about something totally stupid. Help us to obey. God, tomorrow when we are tempted to do whatever it is, to look at what we shouldn't look at, or to think what we shouldn't think, to say what we shouldn't say, God, please by your Spirit stir us that we have the opportunity to be your treasured possession. And may that be our goal, for Christ is worthy of our obedience. We ask these things in his name. Amen.